So today we're going to watch some of our nearest and dearest sci-fi movies and make the connection between what we're seeing on screen and our real lives from the perspective of food, environment, sustainability, and agriculture.
The secret of Soylent Green.
I'm a farmer.
Voila. Bon appetit.
I'm Sonali McDermott. I am a climate scientist and associate professor of environmental studies at New York University.
Hey, pizza, I'm hungry.
All right, just wait your turn.
Damn it, when it's ready, could you just shove it in my mouth?
Don't you be a smartass.
I'll crank the Atrocity channel.
Pizza machines made by Black & Decker. Product placements.
Is it ready?
Here you go.
Oh boy, Mom, you sure can hydrate a pizza.
So the 80s and 90s seem to be completely obsessed with astronaut food for some reason.
This scene always reminded me of going camping as a kid, and you had those like dehydrated meals, and they were actually probably my favorite meals on the camping trip.
This signifies to me what it must have felt like back in the 50s and 60s when TV dinners started coming online and we realized that we could freeze our food or that we could microwave it very easily and we didn't have to spend so much time cooking. People talk about this period as almost liberating, particularly if you're a working woman in the 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s. To me, this is almost something that's very American in a lot of ways and something that that we seem to always want and visualize in our future.
Ultimately, where we're going to get to on this is going to look nothing like that. That the direction that food really actually seems to be going in is more wholesome, more natural, and technologies to make things like high quality, highly nutritious vegetables available down the road as opposed to needing to be shipped across the country.
So is there a version of food in the future that's both quick and fast and organic? And I actually see a version of that happening right now. What comes to mind are these big salad chains, these restaurant chains that you're seeing, right? You know, the idea of crafting your own salad at a salad bar has been around for a while, but some of these companies are starting to liaise with local producers, right, and local farmers. You have a list of where everything comes from. And I think what the nexus that those businesses are trying to achieve is this nexus of something that's fast, that's easy, but something that you don't have to think about with respect to health, with respect to nutrition, and to the extent that organics are better for the environment, right? You've got some kind of sustainability built into that.
So I personally don't think we're going to end up with astronaut food. If anything, the food system is going to go in the opposite direction towards more wholesome, more nutritious, better for the planet.
The other thing I would say though is the farm that drops down.
First, please. Thank you.
That is something that I believe we will see in climate technology and in like ag tech, kind of a decentralization of farming, right? So you have really cool companies working on building vertical farms. So here in New York City, you could have a high-rise, but instead of just apartments or businesses in the high-rise or offices, it would be a full-on vertical farm. New Yorkers could get farm fresh fruits and vegetables, delivered from within the city versus shipping it in from outside.
Track.
Brondo the Thirst Mutilator had come to replace water virtually everywhere. Water, the basic component of all life, had been deemed a threat to Brondo's profit margin. The solution came during the budget crisis of 2330, when the Brondo Corporation simply bought the FDA and the FCC, enabling them to say, do, and sell anything they wanted.
Brondo, what I wouldn't give for a nice quenching bottle of Brondo right now.
There's so much of that clip that speaks to some of the frustrations and challenges that I think many of us feel, right? And that is that we don't know who to trust. We see all these labels, and there's probably a question that goes through at least my mind, I'm sure your mind, when you go into the grocery store thinking, well, what does this actually mean? Who's responsible for putting these things on my product? Or if you're buying fresh food, fresh fruits and vegetables, where did this come from? And so the idea that a corporation can buy out our government. It sort of is a very overt example and a sort of in-your-face example of the kinds of things that we fear might be going on in reality behind the scenes, right? And that is that our government and the kinds of policies that are being enacted may not represent people, but may instead be representing interests that are primarily concerned with profit.
The pieces of this that are accurate is the whole world through climate change is getting drier. Potable water, drinking water is getting more and more scarce, and we are going to have to address this with something. We are probably not going to address this with sports drinks. We're probably going to address this with things like recycling more of our water, gray water systems, things like that, as well as sucking water directly out of the air, atmospheric water generation, with companies like Source Water, one of our portfolio companies. So at the end of the day, the underlying theme here, water becomes more scarce, absolutely true. We should be worried about that in general, but the solution here is probably not high electrolyte, what cows crave, Brondo.
Are you Sapper Morton?
I'm a farmer. This is a protein farm. Wallace design.
Is that what I smell?
Grow that just for me.
Okay, so we got some greenhouses where we're farming protein. It's an indiscriminately, bug-looking thing.
He's in a hazmat suit, effectively. He's got an apparatus to sequester his own breath and breathing and air from that of the chamber that he's in. The chamber looks like it's rigged up with all sorts of feeders, and then I imagine there might be some other things in there to inhibit the growth of things that could kill, right? So sides, right? In this case, not an insecticide because you're farming insect, but whatever other side you need to control the growth of other things happening in there. I mean, that speaks to this industrialization, right? When you see agricultural laborers going out into the field to spray fruits, vegetables. But what this suggests is that this is no longer a small-scale operation. And in order to scale it, you have to be working under conditions that use a lot of chemicals, that use a lot of processes that could be detrimental to people if they, of laborers, right? I'm assuming this guy is probably not very wealthy, right? And so again, we start to think about the equity issues that faced agricultural laborers.
This I'll maybe give medium accuracy to, because ultimately what's going to happen is there are way more efficient ways for us to make protein for the masses than animals. Animals are a very inefficient way to make protein, so think cows. So I think the accuracy here is we will probably have lab-grown meat things that taste on the sort of molecular level actually are like meat, but they are grown in a lab sort of situation like this. I don't think it's going to be a situation where we end up doing things like grinding up slugs, unless it's for, like cricket flour.
And surprisingly enough, is an area of interest in the venture capital community are these protein farms with bugs. It seems very foreign within Western cultures, but outside of the Western world, it's not uncommon to actually consume insects. And they're supposed to be a very protein-rich source of food, or a source of food that's very protein-rich. I personally have not tried, I've seen them, they've been offered cricket protein bars before. Just still feels weird to me, but this is definitely happening.
I think it's slightly unclear how something like this would scale, and I will say that there's a lot that we don't know about insects, and there are some very real concerns, particularly when we're approaching what we consider to be this insect apocalypse. Now, we're losing a lot of insects, right, as a result of many global environmental change factors. There is a lot of discussion in the academic community about whether or not this is a good idea and what unanticipated consequences the scaling of insect-based agriculture might have. I think there's large agreement that from an environmental perspective, it could be better. But as I mentioned, there's a lot that we don't know about insects that might raise some of the same welfare concerns that we have of other animals, but we just appreciate them less because we happen to not like bugs as much.
Voila. Bon appetit.
We needed a miracle.
This beautiful and special little creature
Will be a revolution in the livestock industry. Our super pigs will not only be big and beautiful, they will also leave a minimal footprint on the environment, consume less feed, and produce less excretions. And most importantly, they need to taste fucking good.
I would give this actually very high accuracy, just not for the reason that people think it's accurate. It's not that we today are going out and genetically modifying and creating super cows. It's that we've been selectively breeding cows for the last 10,000 years to be what they are. Cows originally were basically bison on the fields of Europe, and we've just bred them and bred them and bred them to the point where they've got such large udders that they need to be, milked 3 times a day, or they've got 3 or 4 times more muscle mass than they typically would have. That's all through what is effectively genetic modification. We just did it over a few thousand years of interbreeding. So I'd say 100% accurate. We already have super cows. It's just we made them the old-fashioned way.
Yes, we have gotten a lot better at farming animals. We have built efficiencies into our animal agricultural pipelines. We are able to make animals fatter and bring them to slaughter much more quickly than we have at any other point in history. And yet, we are still not feeding the world. There are still 800 million hungry people, 700 million hungry people across the planet. We still have climate change, and it's getting worse. This utopic future that's predicted through better livestock is not one that we already almost have that. And it's not one that has actually offered us a lot of solutions. And I think this scene kind of hits all of those thoughts for me. Yeah.
New York City in the year 2022. Nothing runs anymore. Nothing works. But the people are the same. And the people will do anything to get what they need.
This is the police.
What they need most is Soylent Green.
The supply of Soylent Green has been exhausted. Return to your home.
What is the secret of Soylent Green?
What is Soylent Green?
You gotta tell them Soylent Green is people!
California just passed, I think, maybe 2 weeks ago, legislation that allows you, instead of being embalmed, instead of being, burnt after you die, you can be composted. And that compost that comes out of the process is actually FDA quality that could then, in theory, go on to, grow some fava beans. And then you can have them with a fine Chianti.
Literal heirloom, it's grandma.
It's not bad.
There is no situation conceivable that, at least in the fields that I work in, across climate change, across agriculture, even in the worst case scenarios, where we run out of food so badly and it's so scarce that we resort to eating each other. I want to articulate that the future does not look this dire, such that we've got large-scale populations resorting to cannibalism. One thing that is of really real concern is regional or localized food scarcity that results from drought or climate extreme events that's temporary but still really impactful. We're seeing this right now across the Horn of Africa, which has been suffering from a multi-year drought, or even the massive widespread flooding in Pakistan as a result of a combination of things. We also see it arise because of trade disruption. So we can think, for example, of what's happening, unfortunately, the war in Ukraine right now and the difficulty we've had getting wheat exports along with other exports out of the country. And so there's a variety of reasons that local and regional food insecurity happens. And again, none of those situations are so dire that we see widespread cannibalism, but we do see famine. We do see people at the edge of really dangerous levels of hunger. And so in those cases, there is enough food globally, and will be, even under some of the worst extreme events, there will be enough food. The problem is getting it distributed, ensuring that it's not wasted, ensuring that everybody has equal access at all times. And so while this future is not a reality for us, thankfully, we can't sit back on our laurels or sit back and say, well, then everything is okay either. We do need to consider very real episodes of hunger and have a game plan to work through that. So a lot of these sci-fi movies that we see today, it's a little bit of art imitating life, right? And I think that these movies are important because they do reflect for us some of these deep-seated fears that I think we would do well to actually reckon with and to actually take head on and talk about a lot more. But I think if these movies can get us talking about some of these things that we fear and that we have good reason to fear, they actually, in a weird way, open the space for thinking about solutions, of which I have to say, I think there are many. I feel it's not so much a matter of technology, although we do need to improve technology to some degree, particularly of crops that we've orphaned, right? Most of our investment over the 20th century has gone into corn, rice, wheat, and soy. But if we can start to focus on some other crops and develop them to be hardier to climate change, and so we can start thinking about this instead of a doomsday scenario in terms of a more socio-political scenario, we can invest in our supply chains, right? These are very surmountable issues. I think what it requires is a bit of creativity and also a bit of responsibility. We need to ensure that the people who can do something about this, be it corporate actors or government agencies or a combination of the two working together, how do we construct a society that holds these actors accountable and responsible? But knowing that that's where the bottleneck is a little bit hopeful, dare I say, because I think there are ways, maybe through movies, to help build that kind of commitment.